Hi, I'm Mark Regev, and together with my co-host, the audacious Ruthie Blum, we are presenting another edition, another episode of Israel Undiplomatic.
Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications, and please leave your comments. We do read them. So, Mark, what'll it be this week?
So I think the big news we need to talk about, at least what's the big news across all the newspapers this morning in Israel, is the bringing back of the 6 bodies of dead hostages. Big news, the newspapers, the radio stations, full of interviews with their families. In most of the cases, they were known that these men, they were all male, were dead already. And obviously, it is a very judicious process that the military goes through before they tell a family that their loved one is dead. I don't think it's true in all the cases that we knew for sure they were dead. And for families, it's difficult, but it's also closure. Is it not, Ruthie?
Well, absolutely. For those who knew that their loved ones were already dead, it's certainly closure. They can now have a funeral, etc. Here's one of the troubles. The trouble is that we knew that I think 4 out of 6 of them were already dead. But there's a dispute about when they were killed and how they were killed. Now, that will become more clear after the forensics are done. But family members, many of them are very angry. And they're angry because what they claim is, okay, these are all hostages who entered Gaza alive. You know, there are several hostages there who were already dead when their bodies were taken into Gaza, and we call those hostages as well. These family members are saying that this is appalling because they all were alive, known to be alive when they entered Gaza. Some of them, we already knew they were alive as late as, I believe, November, December. Partly because we saw some of them on video and because hostages who were freed, said they had seen them in the tunnels in Gaza. So the family members are very, very angry, and they're angry on 2 counts. One is they said it's possible that the men were killed in an Israeli strike on the tunnels. And the other is because they believe, and I say believe because I disagree with this, that had Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted to make a deal with Hamas, none of these men would be dead now, and that it's Netanyahu's fault. And so I'm going to ask you, what do you feel about that particular aspect of it?
So first of all, families of dead hostages, they can say and express themselves, and I don't think you can criticize them. They are, it's like the families of bereaved soldiers. Israeli society sort of gives them a special right to say whatever they want, because they have the right to express their feelings, their thoughts, because they've gone through, and especially when a journalist puts the microphone in front of their mouth, yes, the day that it's been announced, that we've got the body of your loved one, and it's they have a special, immunity to other public comments. But I think they're wrong on a number of counts. One, that these people were taken alive by force into Gaza by Hamas. Hamas was responsible for their capture, for their captivity, and for their staying in Gaza. And that should never be forgotten. They were in Gaza as hostages because Hamas took them, kidnapped them. And it's on Hamas. Their deaths are on Hamas. Even if, and we don't know this, if they were inadvertently killed by Israeli fire during, operations, it was inadvertent, but they were deliberately there because Hamas brought them there.
Right. Well, there are 2 other points about this. One is that in this particular case, they're all men. All the 6 that were in question were men. And given the terms of any so-called hostage deal on the table, which I have argued all along, never was on the table. Hamas never agreed to it, doesn't agree to any deal. But let's say the supposed ostensible Biden Blinken hostage deal.
I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that's true, Ruthie, because the older men would have come out as humanitarian.
Only the very old one, I think, who was on medication, let's say. But it's likely that the others would not. It's not clear. That's one thing. But that's again, those are details. But a more important point, and I think this gets to why Israelis right now, there's a lot of infighting in Israel in a way that there wasn't in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. And that is not only because there's the pro-Netanyahu, anti-Netanyahu crowd and all that. That's the usual stuff. And that's regardless of October 7th. But there is a point, and no Israeli would disagree with this, that these innocent people, these were not soldiers, these are innocent people, stolen from their homes, first watching their loved ones be murdered, slaughtered, raped in front of them, and all these at the Nova Music Festival, the same thing. All innocent people just having a nice holiday, and neither the government nor the army protected them. And so there is a sense, and nobody disagrees with that the responsibility, it doesn't matter who's prime minister, it doesn't matter who's defense minister or chief of staff, the fact is that these were just people going about their lives and having a nice holiday, and the worst atrocities were committed against them since the Holocaust. And to top that all off, the ones who are still languishing in the tunnels in Gaza. In that sense, when they say, okay, well, it doesn't really what matters is it's your fault, so you've got to solve it. Yes, Hamas are evil. Yes, Hamas committed the crimes. But where were you? Why did you allow Hamas to commit these crimes? And here there's no simple answer to that at all.
So I first of all, I accept that it's the responsibility of the government to do everything it can to bring these people home alive. And I think that's true. That's one of a whole bunch of responsibilities that the government has. But this has to be one of the major priorities, bringing them home alive if it's possible. I remember both of us were then working for the Israeli government, which neither of us are doing today, yes. But in November, when there was the prisoner release, Israel was willing to continue with those releases. It was Hamas that decided no more releases, and they violated it, and they opened fire, in fact, on Israel.
And by the way, let's remember, one of the things that happened right before they violated, they violated by firing more rockets. But the more important point is, in the third release of hostages in the beginning, it was women, children, all that, and the whole country was just weeping with joy over that. They were supposed to provide a list of the names of the next batch of women, children, and maybe also men on medication. I don't remember the exact criteria, but certainly women and children. And they didn't give the list. And that day went on and hours went by and they wouldn't give a list. And then when they refused to give a list, then they sent no hostages back and then opened fire.
No, it's clear.
What we then thought is maybe all the hostages are dead. We didn't understand. Maybe they don't know where they are. Then there were rumors. Hamas said, well, we don't really know where they all are. But
hang on just for a moment. That's why we agreed to the ceasefire, because Hamas said in conditions of combat we can't really know who we've got.
We need to look for them.
And that's why they had those extended period of quiet in November so they could find people. And still after the quiet, they couldn't find them. It's a bit dicey, if you ask me.
And they said humanitarian aid, which we've been giving, and humanitarian corridors, and Hamas has been taking over those as well. But here's the thing. Now, every time we thought, well, maybe they're all dead, we don't know. We hear rumors, we don't know.
I don't think anyone says they're all dead.
No. Unfortunately, it's that as time goes by, the families are saying, look, these people were alive, last month. So how do we know that the next ones aren't? No, we don't know. We're assuming that about 70 of them are still alive. But here's the thing, is that one of the reasons we don't know is that Hamas, again, won't give a list, and has also, let's not forget, has no interest in telling us who's alive and who's dead, etc. That's for sure. And they don't want to deal. What they thought in the first deal, the reason they agreed to it was they thought, Israel agreed to a pause and then they'll continue fighting. They didn't believe that we would continue fighting. And by the way, they had good reason to suspect that we would not. And that was because of Washington, of the international community in general, but pressure from Washington. Which brings me to today. Secretary of State Blinken was just here. He had a long meeting with
2.5 hours, one-on-one.
One-on-one. And at the end of this meeting, he actually had to acknowledge, which something he and Biden should have acknowledged all along.
Well, they have on occasion. They have on occasion.
Very grudgingly and always equating to some extent Israel and Hamas. Both sides need to.
No. I want to correct you factually. There was one or two occasions where the president himself said the ball is in Hamas's court because the Israelis
right,
are.
And then after that, the next day or later in the day, he said something like, "There's no excuses from any side." Okay, do not, Mark. One thing I will not let you do is make excuses for the Biden administration. Okay, you can try, but it won't.
I just demand that we be factual totally on this program.
But those are factual quotes from Biden and Blinken.
But I also quoted him factually when he said...
You did, and what I said is they kind of took it back. Now, in this particular case, Blinken did say, he said, Netanyahu has agreed.
Has accepted.
Has accepted all the bridging, what do they call it? The
American
bridging clauses to enable this deal. Yeah. And then Hamas rejected it, of course.
And he said also, and now it's up to Hamas also.
Now it's up to Hamas. Of course, Hamas is saying, oh, yeah, right. See, that's another trouble. It's up to Hamas. This is like, again, this is like telling Jack the Ripper, okay, now it's up to you, buddy. Okay, now we've negotiated. Now, we've caught, we're treating Hamas like it's another country. Okay, let's do a deal. It's negotiating. That's the trouble here. This is not a boardroom. All right, these are mass murderers we're dealing with. But in any case...
Stop for a moment. They are mass murderers. They are disgusting, despicable, terrible people. And hopefully when this is over, a lot of them will no longer be among the living. We don't want to, I'm talking about Hamas. Yes, they are a vicious, brutal, murderous enemy. But with that vicious, brutal, murderous enemy, we nevertheless made a deal in November and we got over 100 people out. And so it means, at least theoretically, it's possible to do it again. And that's what the effort is. And it's clear the Americans, for all sorts of reasons, want there to be such a deal. It's clear that the Egyptians and even the Qataris are trying to help everyone for their own reasons. And I believe this government, Netanyahu, under the correct conditions, will agree, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. There's no question about that. If anything, I have to say, Netanyahu, if anything, he gets some people to the right of him angry at how, what do they say, how I would say he's being too weak or something like that. No. Netanyahu has been extremely clear that he is interested in making it. He means it. He wants to make a deal, etc., but there are certain red lines he can't cross. Now, those red lines are imperative. He's already agreed, okay, tons of terrorists to be released in exchange for the hostages, et cetera, et cetera. There are many, many things he's agreeing to that.
And here we have to say something I think we mentioned very briefly last week, that one of the Palestinian terrorists who was in an Israeli jail, who was released last November, was involved in a murderous attack on an Israeli just 2 weeks ago.
Exactly.
And so people have to understand when Israel releases people, there is risk involved, because as much as we...
More than risk, because we've seen, by the way, Sinwar himself was released in the Shalit deal. So we see that all the time.
But so I'm saying you have to, when people say, okay, we have a responsibility to bring back the hostages, we've got a responsibility to live Israelis who may be killed, but if you do something that's not right.
Exactly. But not only that, in getting to that, we also have a responsibility not to let another October 7th happen, not only not in the south, but not in the north, and not from Judea and Samaria, which some people call the West Bank, and not from Jordan, and not from anywhere, Syria. Here's the thing. We are teaching, if we capitulate too much, we teach all of the terrorists in the region, all of the Islamic radicals and Iran, that this is the way to go. Because that's it, just kidnap people. And then you bargain with them to get him back. Now, here's the other thing is one of the things that Netanyahu says, we cannot withdraw all our troops from Gaza. We have got to have control of the Philadelphia corridor. That is the border between Gaza and Egypt, because we also discovered a massive network of terror tunnels leading from them. And those were the tunnels that enabled building the other tunnels and the terrorism and the weaponry and all of that. So now Egypt doesn't want us to have any control over there. Big surprise, right? But here's the thing. He is being Netanyahu says that we have to do. Now, subsequently, after this productive meeting between Blinken and Netanyahu, both of them said it was productive, or he said constructive, he said instructive, whatever. They said it was a very fruitful meeting. And Blinken came out and said, yes, Netanyahu has agreed to everything. Now it's in the ball is in Hamas's court. And then Blinken went off to Cairo, I believe, and then on his way to Doha. And it was reported in the newspaper that's very closely aligned with the Biden administration that since then, that when Blinken went to Egypt, again, this was all yesterday we're talking about, Netanyahu met with parents, bereaved parents and parents of hostages. And he told them that and these parents said, please don't exit the war before winning, because then you endanger everybody else's kids and our other kids, etc. And all the fallen soldiers will have been in vain. And he assured them that he wouldn't, that he was aiming for total victory. And one of the things he told them was that he told Blinken that the Philadelphia corridor was, we've got to retain control of that so that we can prevent these other October 7th. And apparently Blinken got wind of this because he was approached by, and senior U.S. officials said, not good. Not good, because they said, not the whole Philadelphia, we don't want to talk about details, because they're hoping to persuade us, okay, you can have a little, maybe you can have, the length of this table.
Can I say it was portrayed in parts of the media that here Netanyahu is being, what did they say in the old westerns? White man speaks with forked tongue. Netanyahu was saying one thing to Blinken and another thing when he met a group of Israelis, as you said, hostage families and the bereaved soldiers. Okay. I tend to think, and from my long experience in government, that it's not true. In other words, when Blinken says he accepted the framework, the parameters that have been put on the table by the Americans, that's true. But obviously, in the framework of those parameters, Netanyahu believes firmly.
There's wiggle room.
Exactly. No. And he believes this is something to be fought about, that he can stand on, and also as part of negotiating tough with Hamas within the framework of the American proposals. Yet this is portrayed sometimes, in the media as something that is just, he's bouncing back and forth all the time. It's not like that. I was in countless meetings and, I see the press release we put out afterwards. And, we say, something, and the press release of the other side is very different. And both sides are telling the truth, but both sides choose to emphasize publicly what they think advances their position.
And in this case, I have to say, just based on experience and familiarity, and I don't mean personal familiarity with the Prime Minister or with the President of the United States or the Secretary of State. No. Experience living in Israel over the years, various wars, various intifadas. In this case, I would trust the Israeli readout of any conversation way more than the Washington readout. That's number one. Number two, we have a bigger problem than just Gaza. Up until this meeting with Blinken, we were talking, all Israelis were talking, prepare for a major attack from Iran and Hezbollah and the Houthis and the whole thing. We're all going to be attacked, and Israelis were making dark humor jokes about, I bought batteries, I bought tuna fish, whatever. We don't know how long we're going to be holed up in our bomb shelters. And then nothing happened. And one of the things Washington did was try to send a signal to Iran and Hezbollah. Okay, give us a minute. We're gonna get this hostage deal done. Don't attack yet. Don't attack Israel. You can retaliate. Again, our greatest ally in Washington over there. Don't do anything yet. Just wait a minute.
I think you might be. I think there's a grain of truth.
Being unfair to Washington.
You are being unfair again, because I don't think they said don't attack yet. I think that's not what they were saying. They were saying this is not the right time we have a chance of maybe ending this, and it's not the right time. And I tend to think that maybe some people on the other side, yes, in Iran and Hezbollah, understood the gravity of Israel's response, and they maybe were looking for a pretext not to hit back.
Oh, that's true.
And therefore the Americans provided them a pretext.
Yeah.
But don't forget, it was the same administration that you don't like in Washington that said, once again, the president repeated the famous don't to the Iranians. The idea that someone in America said just put it off for the time being and then you can attack when you want to. No, I don't think that's been the American message, to be frank. What I will say, though,
I disagree, but okay.
If you talk about the danger of escalation and to a wider war, I think we can't ignore something else that Hamas took credit for this week. Both Hamas and Islamic Jihad took credit for a suicide bomber who came from the West Bank and into Israel, into Tel Aviv, maybe close to where you live, you will tell me in a moment, and mistakenly with a suicide
legal work permit
in Israel. And he had on his back, strapped to him, a high explosive, and he inadvertently, from his own perspective, blew himself up and no one else.
Too early. Apparently,
maybe it was a malfunction or something.
They suspect he was on his way to the Bloomfield Sports Stadium to
explode himself.
Create
mass casualties. Now, why is this important? Because this is something that the Israelis went through, we went through, you went through, I went through 20 years ago when there was this big wave of suicide bombings in Israel, and scores of Israelis were murdered on buses, in coffee shops, in pizza parlors. We remember it well. There were a few incidences that are stuck in the national memory, where the massacre on the Passover Seder at the Park Hotel in Netanyahu, and there was the attack on the young people at the Dolphinarium discotheque on the beach in Tel Aviv. I mean, we had some really tough experiences, and the idea that we would have a new wave of suicide bombings, this time, obviously, with a bit of luck, it didn't happen. No one was killed on our side. But this raises a specter, which is, I think, if one's talking about a dangerous escalation. And it must be remembered here, sometimes if someone, suddenly, when people talk about lone wolf terrorism, someone finds a knife or takes, another kitchen utensil and walks down the street in somewhere in Israel and starts stabbing people, that can be a lone wolf. That can be someone who, self-radicalized on the internet and decides they want to do something and kill the Jews. We've had too much of that. But the suicide bomber has to be part of a network. He needs technological support. He needs logistic support. This means that on the West Bank today, it's clear, and this is not the only example, unfortunately, there's a capability to produce suicide bombers, and there's a capability to send them into Israel to kill people. And this has to be a wake-up call for us in Israel, because Hamas would just love to repeat its, inverted commas, parentheses, its successes of the beginning of the century, when suicide bombers were coming into Israel and murdering Israelis.
And guess what was the outcome of those suicide bombers in Israel coming in and terrorizing the whole country all the time, the center of the country? I remember I couldn't let my kids take the bus to school. And people were traumatized, not just by being wounded, but imagine you're a child and you see the head of a suicide bomber fly into your schoolyard. I'm not kidding. That happened. There was a lot of trauma. But guess what? How they got rewarded. They got Gaza.
No, here I disagree with you very, very closely.
Oh, okay.
I remember the history very, very well. Ariel Sharon was Prime Minister of Israel.
Disengaging from Gaza because we have to protect Israelis from the suicide bombers.
No, I want to stress that Ariel Sharon comes to power in 2001.
Yes.
And he orchestrates, after the Park massacre in Netanyahu, he organizes a major Israeli incursion into the West Bank. He takes the fight to the terrorists. He takes the Israeli soldiers literally to Arafat's headquarters and has Arafat locked into this sole room while the rest is surrounded by the Israeli soldiers. And only after he has largely destroyed, the Palestinian terrorist infrastructure on the West Bank, only then does he say, okay, we've won the war militarily. What can we do politically? You were right when you said...
No, because Gaza was still presenting a problem because they were coming, the suicide bombers were also coming into Israel from Gaza. As we've seen, that border, no matter what the hell we do with it, it's porous. And they were climbing in and getting in. And he... Again, a lot of people misremember, and they think he was trying to do that for peace. But I have to be in fairness to Sharon.
He didn't talk about peace.
In fairness to Sharon, he said, this is a security measure.
Correct.
We are going to wall them off. They have, and by the way, another thing that Israel gets blamed for is that somehow that they're landlocked. But they've got Egypt. They have a border with Egypt. Nobody ever blamed Egypt for it. Point being, we're going to close them off. And then, if they try to do anything, then we will.
I'll say it even stronger. Sharon had this very sort of folksy thing about him, yes? And he would say, listen, if the Palestinians in Gaza want to live with us in peace, we can have crossings in the fence, and we can trade, and we can have tourism, and we can have people going back and forth. And if the Palestinians want to form some sort of Taliban regime and you know, be extremists, so we've got this wall now, fence separating us from Gaza, they can go to hell. We're safe on our side of the frontier. And
so now we are where we are, and disengagement.
No, but I just saying the missiles just took the Sharon theory.
Well, of course, and the missiles, they didn't need to come in with backpacks with dynamite.
Correct,
okay.
correct.
So, but the point is, there were plenty of people who anticipated this. Okay, I'm not going to boast about being one of those people, but I will a little bit, which is to say, that is, and then we are where we are today. So again, now. The suicide bombers, that phenomenon, it's hard to say whether they'll be able to have enough help and everything. But one thing it does show you is that what they're doing there, we are being attacked on all sides with a kind of war of attrition. Okay, that's like these little rockets from Gaza, even though we've decimated their military capability.
Correct.
But they still have these little homemade launchers, you know, this constant. And Hezbollah in the north has not engaged in the mass attack it threatened to 2 weeks ago. But every day it attacks us so much, and you don't even realize it, because if you're living in if you're not living in northern Israel, okay, life is going on normally, but it is not normal. Today, this morning, 50 rockets that hit. 4 of them landed on someone's home. It was destroyed. Now, just by a miracle, like with the suicide bomber, by a miracle, we didn't have mass casualties. Now, I have argued again and again, we cannot treat these events as though that, well, okay, we had a miracle, so that doesn't count. It should count, because it would have killed many, many people. And we are not, in my opinion, Israel is not behaving like a country at war. We're at war. This business of that the White House is saying, let's not escalate to regional war. We are in a regional war.
So I will say the following. Gaza is going to wind down. It's going to wind down either because of a deal to release the hostages, maybe small probability, maybe medium probability, but it's a possibility. Or it'll wind down because we are finishing the job slowly but surely. And then the real question will be what happens in the north, because what Hezbollah will want to say, well, there's a ceasefire in Gaza, we're ceasing to fire, and they'll just, and Israel will not accept that. Israel says we refuse to have Hezbollah on the border, eyeball to eyeball. Our people in the north won't feel safe to go back to their homes. There has to be a new situation in Lebanon when this is over. And I think the defense minister said yesterday, he said, we're looking at the north, and the moment of truth is approaching. Either Hezbollah moves back from the border because they choose to, or Israel is going to have to do something, a military operation, to destroy their whole presence, their capability in the south. One way or the other, as Gaza winds down, I think that the situation in the north is ready for Israel and for decisions. And ultimately, if Lebanon is going to become a huge, big battlefield, because at the moment it's a war of attrition, and they hit us, but we've also been hitting back Hezbollah targets across Lebanon, a war of attrition, but it can't, it's not sustainable. There has to be, in the near future, there has to be a decision. Either there's going to be a diplomatic solution where Hezbollah is moving away from the border, or unfortunately, there's going to have to be an Israeli military operation that pushes them back from the border.
But you know what? Diplomatic solutions would be fine if our allies, here's the thing, a diplomatic solution actually ends all wars in a way. I mean, right, you're victorious, and then you negotiate, okay, what the terms of your victory are. In our case, it's always that that we might be victors, and then the losers dictate the terms. Okay, we're not normal in that sense. But I will say one thing: even a diplomatic solution, it'll only work if it's enforced by power, and that is why the last diplomatic solution in Lebanon did not work, because nobody enforced it, and now you can't trust anybody, and we have to trust ourselves. But it would be really good if we could also trust the United States and other allies to go to battle for it. And let me tell you something. This business of Biden saying, don't, oh, come on, they're really shaking in their boots, okay? This is an administration that released all sanctions on Iran. So don't give me that.
That's not true factually. That's not true factually. There are all these sanctions still in Iran
No,
today.
they removed the bulk of the sanctions.
There are still sanctions on Iran.
Right, but they're
But
not.
but
this is again. This is an administration.
You can criticize them, but criticize them factually.
Factually, they want a deal with Iran. Now they realize that's not in the cards, right? But what I'm trying to say is you have to be able to enforce it. And our enemy, but also we talk all the time about deterrence, and we had no deterrence on October 7th. You tell me what deterrence we are creating right now. Do you see any?
So I will finish off, because we're coming to the end of our episode here. But I would say the following. On the issue of enforcement, I agree with you 100%. We can only count on ourselves. And if there is a new arrangement in southern Lebanon where Hezbollah is no longer present in the border area, and they violate that, we have to hit back and hit back hard. And when there's a minor infringement, we have to act as well. Because, they have these salami tactics. They'll try to reestablish themselves in the south, and it will be incumbent upon us, Israel, to enforce any arrangement that is made. We can't expect anyone else to do it. We will have to use military might if we need to. That's clear to me. On the issue of deterrence, I do disagree with you, Ruthie, and I apologize, but I do disagree with you because I think the whole Arab world has seen, and all our enemies, not the whole Arab world is our enemy, but our enemies have seen what has happened in Gaza since October 7th. And they've seen what Hamas has suffered. They've seen the elimination of Hamas's leaders. They've seen the destruction in Gaza. They see the death and destruction that Hamas has brought upon the Gaza Strip. To say that Israeli deterrence has not been strengthened, one of the reasons there is a chance, it's not a foregone conclusion, there's a chance for Hezbollah to move back from the border in southern Lebanon is precisely because they don't want Lebanon to go the path of Gaza. And that means Israeli deterrence has been strengthened.
So, just to end, one more. Of course, I have to have the last word, naturally, right? No, but then any terms of a hostage release deal that involves rewarding Hamas for its atrocities will undo that deterrence. And that's what I'm worried about.
And with that, we'll have to finish. I look forward to speaking to you again next week, Ruthie.
I do too. And you see, I barely screamed at you today.
Very unusual.